But the way I became aware of this situation relative to accessory dwelling units was I got a call from one of our members, and they said, you know what, in my neighborhood, we've got someone that's converting a garage, and I don't think there's going to be any parking replacement for that garage conversion. And so, the city at some point in time, if you remember the extreme neighborhood makeover, when they were just, they were horrified that somebody might convert a garage and not provide extra parking, and they tortured people for parking on their in the setback, or which they believed should have been a lawn. And so I placed a call into the city on July 8th to Tom Cole, the Director of Community Development, because I wanted to ask him, had something changed? Had the rules changed? Have we decided that now what was important before is no longer important? And so I remembered when that was such a big deal. We can talk about our friend Ms. Gonzalez, who was caught with a garage conversion, which was simply living space, and she had a carport. And they made her jump through all kinds of hoops and rebuild the carport. And then all of the people who had been parking, or maybe they had extended their driveway so they could park another car, and so it was in what they called a required setback, which, if you go into our codes, is the first 20 feet between the edge of your sidewalk and where you can start construction. And so that was an extremely important thing to everybody, except I noticed that all of the new homes being built, like over in the Trestles where they only have a 10-foot setback, or up in the Five Knolls where they only have a 10-foot or less setback, we're kind of wondering what was going on. So forget all that stuff. I guess all the rules are going to change, and we'll figure out what we're doing now. So Tom Cole didn't call me back. Instead, he had James Chow call me. And James Chow's in planning. I've known him for a long time. He's a good guy. He wouldn't tell me stories. But that doesn't mean that I'm not the trust and verify kind of guy. This is going to go verify everything he said. So he returned my call, and he provided me with the following information. He said, I gave him the address of that garage conversion, and he said, that conversion is being accomplished to convert a garage to an accessory dwelling unit. And replacing the lost parking is not required. And he cited two bills, Senate Bill 229 and Assembly Bill 494. And so there's been a lot of bills before that and after that. So we'll look at those two, and you can see that it's going to require some additional training, or some additional research. But I was having this conversation at the Old Town New Hall Association board meeting last night. Well, that's not true. It was Monday night, 2 nights ago. And one of the individuals said, they're doing that here in New Hall now. And you can, there are people that are renting, like, might be a one-car garage that's been converted with a little bathroom and kind of a kitchenette and a living space. And they're charging $800 a month. That doesn't sound very affordable to me, and the amount of space is unbelievable that someone would be paying that kind of money for that small of a space. Well, Senate Bill 229 is the one that everybody says really kicked this off, authored by Senator Robert Witkowski, and signed by our governor in 2017, signed by Governor Brown. And so some of the highlights of Senate Bill 229 is I went and I read the text of the bill. Foolish me, I always decide I want to see what it actually says. So I've got to get back with James, because the bill says that a local agency may, by ordinance, provide for the creation of accessory dwelling units in areas zoned for single or multifamily use. So realize that also means that if you have an apartment building, you can do this. Isn't that interesting? Because it's a multifamily dwelling, right? So it was really interesting to me because I know that there have been many other bills passed since then. So I'm kind of curious why James pointed me at Senate Bill 229 when Senate Bill 229 said that the city could do it by ordinance. And I went in and I looked, and I didn't really see an ordinance for that, but it may be buried in other things. I'll call him and we'll talk about it some more. But what the ordinance said that you can do the following things. You can impose standards on accessory dwelling units that include parking, height, setback, lot coverage, landscape, architectural view, maximum size, and all different kinds of things. And of course, we want to protect it to make sure it's not on the California Registry of Historic Places. But those things were all, at that time, going to be in the ordinance. But the thing that struck me immediately, I know it's got a nice red star there, was it allows the local agency to reduce or eliminate parking requirements for accessory dwelling units. So if you rent a unit to somebody and they work, and they probably get to work in a car, where do they park? Well, they park out on the street, of course, right? Because that's the only place to park. And then that just clogs the neighborhoods. Now, it's really interesting. If you go through my neighborhood and you come right around my street's wide, has lots of corner lots, and it's not that congested. But if I just go down Wellhaven, as an example, man, you go down there, there's no place to park because it's so crowded. So what we're going to do now is we're going to increase that density on those streets, depending upon how many of these happen. So they allow the local agency to require. They can require that the ADU does not exceed the allowable density, and is consistent with existing zoning plan, etc. But still, this is something that they may do. And then, but it does say that they are required that the accessory dwelling unit can be rented, but not sold separately from the private residence. So at least someone can't build these things and then, get an automatic subdivision and sell off a piece of the property. And again, it can be constructed on a lot zoned for single-family or multifamily dwelling. The unit can be attached to or located within the living area of an existing primary dwelling. Well, that says to me that someone could take a home, divide off a section of it, providing that they add a bathroom and a kitchenette, and call that another dwelling unit. Interesting. The total size of an ADU shall not exceed 50% of the primary dwelling, or 1,200 square feet maximum. Okay. No setback shall be required for an existing garage that is converted to an ADU. Now, that doesn't mean much here in Santa Clarita anymore, because there was a time when I moved in, a very long time ago, when the setback between living space and your lot line had to be 10 feet. But your garage could be 5 feet from your property line. That's been changed a long time ago to where living space can be within 5 feet of your property line. So it doesn't really mean much here. Parking requirements shall not exceed 1 parking space per unit or per bedroom, whichever is less. Now, let me think about that for a minute. It can be 1 parking space per unit or a bedroom. So a unit may have more than 1 bedroom. But when would it ever be, if whichever is less, when would it ever be more than 1? It didn't make much sense to me. But off-street parking, this is some people are going to love this. Off-street parking shall be permitted in the setback area. Do you know where the setback area is? That's your front lawn. Right? So all of the time when the city has been torturing people for building a little bit of an extra driveway or bringing something into the setback, Now, if you build an ADU, all that's out the window. You can just park anywhere in that area that you want. It's amazing to me. Okay, so when a garage or a carport is demolished in conjunction with the construction of an ADU, the local agency requires off-street parking spaces be replaced. The replacement spaces may be located in any configuration on the lot. Well, that's interesting because it includes uncovered spaces, covered spaces, tandem spaces, or mechanical automobile parking lifts. I'm waiting to see the first person that puts one of those in their front setback and listen to what the screaming that's going to occur. Can you imagine that? There you go. Well, the insanity never stops in Sacramento. So Richard Bloom was supposed to be the author of Senate Bill 494, signed also by the governor October 8th. You know, I don't know whether Bloom or the other guy is a plagiarizer because the bills essentially are the same. So the text is very similar to 229. They both start off with the statement a local agency may by ordinance provide. But you know what? I know in several instances there have been bills passed that take away the may and make it a requirement. This came out of the summary, the assembly floor summary, when you can look up a bill and you can see that stuff. ADU may be rented separately from the primary residence, but not sold separately. Requires parking requirements not exceed one parking space per unit or bedroom, whichever is less. And I would think one always has to be less. Removes the option to prohibit off-street parking. Allows a local agency to require replacement of parking spaces in any configuration on the same lot. And so that's an interesting, I guess that would mean that if you had a corner lot and you wanted to put parking in your backyard, you could just do it, right? Now that wasn't legal. Provides that a local agency must ministerially approve the ADU application if the unit is contained within the existing space of a single-family dwelling unit or blah, blah. Ministerially does not mean you're going to pray over it. What ministerially means in a legal sense, there it is. It's an act or function that conforms to an instruction or a prescribed procedure. It connotates obedience. A ministerial act or duty is a function performed without the use of judgment. So it's something where you follow the orders and don't make any decisions about it. So that's ministerially from their standpoint. The accessory structure could be a studio, a pool house, or any other similar structure could be converted into one. The city authorized the city to require the owner occupancy in either the primary or accessory unit. You know what? I'm hoping. I want to go back to Chow and find out if that is true in our city, because if it isn't, it should be. I'll tell you why. Remember I told you right at the beginning I got notified of an accessory dwelling unit garage conversion in my friend's neighborhood. That particular house has no one living in it. It was purchased by a realtor as a rental. Okay? So by doing this, now they have two things to rent. So it would really be interesting to see if we can work with that. Well, there's a lot of legislation that preceded this. There was AB 1866, which was in 2002, required local governments to follow the rules and not make any decisions. Bloom also had AB 2299 in 2016 that relaxed parking restrictions, prohibited the need for a passageway, and increasing the permissible size of an ADU. By the way, currently, when you start going to some of the more current laws, it prohibits having a passageway between the two items. So you can't, in other words, you can't say, I'm building an ADU and then use it as living space in the primary residence. You can't have a pathway between the two. And then SB 1069, you notice these people were very interested in doing this for you. Exempting parking requirements for specified types and limits the utility connection fees and capacity charges and requirements. And that's been carried forward a little bit more. So the question is, why do you pay a connection fee? Well, you pay a connection fee because you're adding to the ability of a service to provide you services. So just think of what happens if 20 people down your block all decide to go do this. Will your services be able to handle it? And if they aren't, how are they going to pay to improve it? So will the sewer service be able to handle it? Will the gas service be able to handle it? Will the electric service? I don't know. It's crazy. Anyway, on July the 9th, the City Council meeting, agenda item 7, they were lamenting over Senate Bill 330. I tried to find out if it passed because it was supposed to be voted on the next day, but I was unable to find that out for right now. Authored by Senator Skinner, and proposes to declare a statewide housing emergency to be in effect until January 1st, 2025. So you must have a crystal ball to know when it's going to end. But, there's nothing to say that we can't waste a good problem on not creating another law. Restrict certain land use authority, including zoning, design details, parking, and overall application standards related to a specified residential development. So now what we've done is we morphed from saying a municipality may do this to a municipality must do this. Okay? It prohibits cities, or if it passes, it will prohibit cities with respect to land where housing is allowable on or after January 2018. Enacting a development policy standard or condition that would change land use designation or zoning, or it prohibits you from changing land use designations or zoning of a parcel to a less intensive use, reducing the intensity of land. In other words, you cannot reduce the requirement standards of a piece of property. You can't change the zoning to say, instead of having one unit per, quarter acre, now you can only have 1 unit per half acre. You can't do that anymore. Impose and enforce design review standards. After limiting the amount of housing or population, you cannot impose or enforce design review standards limiting the amount of people or the population, except for some long-standing limits in agricultural counties. Well, that's great. Prohibits the cities from requiring a minimum parking requirement if the residential development is in 1/4 mile of a rail stop. When are these idiots going to realize that people are not going to walk there? Right? I've still got to do it. Someone I talked to just the other day, I was talking to them about the bridge over via Metro. And I was saying, I've never seen anybody on it. They said, it gets used on Saturdays. But you know what? I've gone down there during rush hour in the morning, and I don't see a herd of people going across there. As a matter of fact, in going down Solidarity Canyon and looking at that bridge, which this development was supposed to be across from the Metrolink station, so all these people were going to move in there and then walk over, I've only seen 2 people on that bridge. And that's the entire time, right? So it's crazy. Prohibits cities from requiring a minimum parking requirement greater than 0.5 spaces per unit if you're farther away. I don't know where you're going to park the other half of your car, or maybe we all got to ride motorcycles so each person only has 2 wheels. I don't know how that's going to work, but I got to tell you what, it's crazy. It just says that where we've been underparked today, they want us to be even more underparked tomorrow. Now, I don't know, I'm sure many of you have driven by a lot of the condo complexes in the city of Santa Clarita. There's one right down here on the other side of what's going to be the community center, right? And outside there's just cars, right? This lodge here is constantly chasing people out of their parking lot because they don't have places to park in their own area. So, or how about Via de Oro? Anybody been down Via de Oro? From Dockweiler to Newhall Avenue? I'll tell you what, you go drive down that street, after 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and I defy you to find a parking place because you can't see a curb. Isabella Parkway by Home Depot, same thing. So this is crazy. And in those cases, like for example, the crossings was just here, the city was bragging that they required 1.8 parking spaces per unit. Woohoo! I don't know where you park the other 20% of your car, but don't worry about it. Requires that a residential development project be subject to the ordinances, policies, and standards adopted in effect when a preliminary application is submitted, and I love that one. That's the only part of this bill that I love, because I've seen what happens when that's not done. Anybody remember when a gentleman went to City Hall and had gone through the whole planning process to build 5 houses on a piece of property in Happy Valley? He complied with all the requirements, complied with all the standards. Everything was cool, right? But Marcia pulled it down for a review at City Hall. And Ferry is saying, well, maybe you could only build 4. Well, the 5th house is the profit in the deal. So the guy didn't build any. He was the guy that built the professional tennis court in his backyard, right? And completely annoyed all his neighbors. They didn't like 5 houses. Well, they got a professional tennis court instead. Or right on Sierra Highway and Newhall Avenue, Redmond went through a process, completed all the requirements, spent $250,000 going through all the processes, getting all of the architecture done, getting all the plans done, goes through the Planning Commission. Planning Commission approves it, gets called down to City Hall again for a review, and they want him to change his project, incorporate property he doesn't own, okay? And he just waved his middle finger at him, and they're starting to now come back to talk about it. So I really believe that you should not be able to arbitrarily add requirements on after you apply for the thing. But I tell you what, I doubt very seriously whether that's something they're going to take into consideration. So Senate Bill 330 was introduced on February the 19th and passed the Senate 28-7-3 on May 29th. And I couldn't believe it. Wilk voted for it. That was in the staff report, by the way. That's how I know about it. So I'm going to ask Senator Wilk next time I see him, how could you vote for this, right? The bill was scheduled to be heard by the Assembly Committee on Local Government. Oh, it was heard by our Assembly Committee on Local Government. That's a city committee, and they recommended that the city oppose it, and that's exactly what the city did. So right after that, at this same last city council meeting, after they're going through their, oh my God, we're losing local control to the state, look at what they're doing to us, they're lamenting about all this thing, I was wondering, will the city do it any better? Is our city officials helping us any more? So it just came out that at that city council meeting, agenda item 13, I hope you guys remember that, creating a jobs creation overlay zone, supported by the Chamber of Commerce, Economic Development Corporation, realtors, via anybody that makes money on moving property back and forth. And what they wanted to do, what this overlay zone does, is it provides areas where all of a sudden now they can increase the size of office buildings to 5 stories without having to go through a conditional use permit. So in other words, it would just go through the planning department. You wouldn't know anything about it unless you found out about it. And they said, look, you know what? In the building that we have today, there'd only be 200 employees. But if we go to 5 stories, we could have 500 employees there, you know? And the building footprint is so much smaller, you know, that we could get more buildings in. Well, what do more buildings mean? To me, they mean more traffic, right? And that's okay if you're going to put the infrastructure in to support it, right? But the one thing they didn't talk about was the footprint of parking those 500 employees, right? Because the building may be smaller and higher, and they have more people in it, but everybody's got to get to work, right? So they didn't discuss at all what the parking footprint and road improvements were to be. But they decided to allow the Director of Community Development the latitude to reduce the parking requirements. So we'll have a taller building with more people and reduced parking requirements. They're not going to tell anybody about it until it's built. And they're complaining about the guys in the state office. Anyway, it's passed on a second reading. They're going to read it again at the next city council meeting, and it passed by a vote of 4-1. And that may sound like somebody actually was thinking, but don't believe it, because the person against it wanted it to be 6 stories. So to me, that just means greater density and more traffic. And stand by, because this story's just begun. We're going to go look at how it went from may to it must be. I'm going to get back with Mr. Chow. But if you start seeing these pop up in your neighborhood, you'll understand what's going on.